Policy 2.
No, sorry, I can't put my hand on it. About activating kind of big boxes so that there was some interface with the public in these key activity centres. So a Pack and Save, for example, or any branch of
So
brand.
Objective 2 on page 6 and the policy that supports it, policy 8 on design of new development.
Okay, sorry, we'll come to it. Apologies.
Sorry. Policy 2, the changes there, clause A, we make reference to the zones that make up key activity centres. In the LERP, we're required to define the extent of key activity centres, and we're proposed to do that through zoning, defining the extent of the zone, and we now describe what zones make up the key activity centre. Clause C is better articulating that we're giving primacy to key activity centres ahead of neighbourhood centres. So what that means is we want, using the example I gave earlier, we want the larger scale development, the larger scale office development or a large retail development to go into the Riccartons or Hornbys of this world, not to go into Bishopdale or Edgware, which could look out of proportion with the context it's in. So it's about giving support to key activity centres over other centres, and that also reflects policy direction in Chapter 6 and the LERP. Policy 3, there's this, the previous version of this policy was very much focused on the new Horswell, North Horswell Centre. There's an existing policy in the plan which is for the new Belfast Centre on the south side of Redcliffe Road, adjacent to Main North Road, which got rezoned in the existing city plan through an Environment Court decision, and we've reinstated policy support around that future centre. Just on that, it's getting into more detail than what the policy is about, but I'll touch on it now. The Environment Court decision put caps on the amount of office and retail floor space within that future centre on the basis that, and put caps on associated with timeframes. So it essentially stages the development of that future centre, and those caps were put in place, staging caps were put in place to avoid larger scale development that would otherwise go in the central city from locating out in Belfast. So the Environment Court's decision has been reflected in this policy, and that's clauses H and I of this policy. In terms of earlier clauses to that policy, it's carried through the themes that were in the original drafted policy, but some legal feedback we had was that the original wording of the policy didn't articulate clearly what was sought. So we've sought to improve that, and that's by adding the Belfast element has drawn out the policy into a longer policy, obviously.
Yep, sorry. Just about the Redcliffe development, is that going to require another set of traffic lights in there? Do you know? I'm just asking Yanni's question, I suppose.
I can't tell you offhand. I'll need to check with a colleague.
I think that there's been concern raised as we've dealt with other matters, usually by way of approving the installation of traffic lights, where there seems to be a growing sense that traffic management has a single solution rather than an integrated transport approach to any development, whether it's commercial, industrial, retail, well, I suppose that is commercial, but even residential subdivisions where they reintegrate with their main network, that there does seem to be quite a limited approach rather than looking at the effect on that transport network as a whole. Is that, have I got that right? Is that's the sense that I'm getting from different councillors?
Yeah.
I think that's a difficult question for Mark to answer.
Yeah.
It is a transport question, and I'm not sure whether David can, or whether we might like to go upstairs and find some of the operational people and
Well,
Ask them for a
maybe
response
it's
to you.
something that just needs to be, because
been noted and
part
take
of
back to
what
them.
we need to be doing at some stage during this process is looking at the integrated whole,
Yeah.
the impact of one on the other, and
Yep.
so commercial and transport and industrial, residential, they're all linked to
They
transport.
do.
Yeah.
And the need for some detailed, integrated transport planning. I think there's something in there about integrated transport planning, but we'll get to that chapter.
Yeah,
in
because
a
I
while.
heard that there was going to be another set of lights there, and that would mean there'd be one set when you turn left at Sticksmill Road to go to the dump, and another one at Northwood, and then the new set would sit in between those, which would be three
Yeah.
in a very close proximity. And that's why I was wondering, so it'd be quite nice to have an answer.
Yeah.
I'll certainly take note of the issue and get you an answer to your question.
Yeah. Glenn and then Tim.
Thank you. In some cases where some places have the distinction of being a key activity centre, a neighbourhood centre, and also attract a master plan, such as New Brighton, how does it work with the different rules and what takes precedent? And is there a joined up approach?
So the suburban centre master plans, the centres identified for those master plans with understand those that sustained significant damage and required a comprehensive approach to their treatment, and didn't necessarily, the decisions about which centres had master plans wasn't necessarily about the function that those centres serve, whether they were a neighbourhood centre or a district centre. But having said that, the master plans, we have given effect to those in this document, not just at a policy level, but also in the rules by, for instance, having specific rules that were sought through the master plan process.
Well, then in the case of the two, e.g. New Brighton's both a key activity centre and a neighbourhood centre, can you tell me how that works, putting aside the master plan?
Sorry,
In terms of, which goes first and how the rules apply?
So New Brighton and Spraydon or Barrington.
No,
Sorry.
New Brighton is a neighbourhood centre and a KAC.
That's right.
Yeah. How did that happen? Do you want to go?
The regional councils defined key activity centres across the city, which are significant focal points, a range of activities which serve, each serve a different part of the city. There's obviously overlaps between their catchments, but in doing so, they've looked at which centres serve the eastern suburbs, and New Brighton was identified as the key activity centre, and others, the sheer scale and volume of activity happening, such as Riccarton and Hornby, they were obvious candidates for key activity centres. But when we've reviewed that list of key activity centres, which comes through in Chapter 6 of the RPS, we've looked at are they the same? Are they all? Should we treat them all the same in respect of the scale of development anticipated? So, for instance, a district centre, we allow for a much greater height limit, and so we've when we looked at which centres fall into which categories of district and neighbourhood, we've also considered having regard to what's anticipated in those centres. Is New Brighton in the same camp as Hornby or Riccarton? And we don't believe it's the right approach to treat them all the same, because New Brighton, for instance, we're going out to the public in the near future to ask the question about possible consolidation of that centre, and when having regard to that, we need to consider what scale of development's allowed and how high can development go, and we don't believe that centre, and the same for Barrington, are on par with what other district centres could sustain in terms of scale of development, for instance.
Okay, so I'm hearing two things. One's a regional policy designation, which is the KAC,
And our interpretation of that has been to separate some of those key activity centres into a neighbourhood centre group, but put the rest as a district centre group.
but both belong in our
hierarchy.
district plans.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's really just talking about the hierarchy that we mentioned before, from the largest, from the city centre right down to your local neighbourhood shops.
Okay.
Tim had a question too.
Now, just looking at the North Hallsville area, with regards to The Hallsville supermarket site, I mean, that's expanding, they're redeveloping that site. Has that been, because one of the people we met with regards to the Hallsville Basin development was they had a vision of something closer to, say, the Hornby Mall or something like that. Would that not affect the development, the Hallsville redevelopment of the existing site?
Yeah, so as part of the work we've been doing to inform the future scale of that North Hallswell Key Activity Centre, we've had economic advice to look at the costs and benefits of that future centre and what impact it would have on other centres. And the most recent advice has come back that there could be significant impacts, not necessarily on the existing Hallswell Centre, but on Barrington. And so the previous scale provided for in the plan of a centre that provides for 60,000 square metres of retail floor space, in the proposed rules that we're putting forward to you, that's been reduced down to 20,000. But having said that, we haven't reduced the zoned area for that commercial area significantly, because it's not just a retail centre. It's going to provide for a whole range of activities, including a civic square, public transport services, entertainment and cultural facilities. So we still want it to be a focal point for that wider community of the southwest, the existing population and future population, which is going to grow significantly. And so the review's been looking at the quantum of retail floor space that the centre provides for, and looking at the impacts on other centres. And so that's why the version that in the rules that accompany these policies, we've got a much lower cap in terms of retail floor space.
Are we in touch with the developers doing the Hallsville supermarket, the revamp of that? Because they've given notice to all the shops that were attached to it. So I'm just wondering, there is a kind of small shopping centre there anyway. So what is their vision of development? Because if they are thinking of something bigger there, and including the post office or banks, etc., would that not change the extent of what we're doing in the basin?
The existing Hallswell Centre, there's obviously constraints to its development. It's got residential in close proximity, and we've had concerns raised from residents in the past in a different process around urban design provisions about the interface between the supermarket and the residential properties. And there's only so much capacity to enable it to grow and to support a range of activities. And a decision was made quite early on that a new centre be developed in this North Hallswell location, which is reflected in the Chapter 6 of the Regional Policy Statement, that provides for a larger centre than the existing Hallswell Centre, but the existing Hallswell Centre still has a role to play for that immediately surrounding neighbourhood and suburb. So it still has a role, and the proposed new centre wouldn't have such a significant impact on that centre from the evidence we've received, but it's about them working together.
And just to add to that too, some further background, the Southwest Area Plan, which you may or may not have heard of, was a plan in a local government, not in the district plan, but it did mention, what were the amount of residents that, given the whole of that area around the Southwest Basin, there's some 25,000 odd residents going to be located there, and that the existing Hallsville Centre was not going to be large enough to provide for all of that new population. But we do have to undertake, and this is what Mark's talked about, and this is why the Section 32 documents are important, is the quantitative analysis on distributional effects, retail effects from any size of that new centre.
But we don't know exactly what they're proposing at this stage for that already existing, the redevelopment of the Hallsville shop, the supermarket area.
I don't have the details to hand now, but we've had discussions with the big retailers about the proposed chapter, and certainly we'll discuss further with them what they're proposing. But there's effects that we can consider of the new centre on that proposal, but also that we need to consider the effects of what they're proposing as an extension on other centres too. So.
Realistically, we could suggest that the removal of those small shops along the edge of the supermarket are a result of the expansion of Christchurch due to the earthquake. Because the supermarket is expanding to cater for the extra growth in that area, so they're kicking out those small shops to expand. So you could say that that is one of the results of the expansion in that area from the earthquake. So there are things happening already well before the 8 ball.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Jimmy?
Regarding to the key activity center, the policy 2A, you particularly emphasize the 2 words, recognize and strengthen the role of the foreign district and neighborhood center. But I'm particularly concerned like Richter Mall and Hornby Mall and with another mall, it's a different location, different situation. For instance, like Richter Mall, you are aware surrounding area is high density, the residential area, but north part is kind of keep the living one area. It's not wider the current space or area is original or existing the commercial industrial area. So if you strengthen this kind of role, my personal particular concern, maybe not so suitable, especially Richter is very close to the central city. So if you more expansion of Richter Mall or surrounding the retail shop or park, etc., whether have a competition, with the central city, because we all aware central city would like to revitalize. This is my concern. But Hornby Mall may be different. Existing area, they have wider vacant space. At the moment, still belong to the commercial or the industrial area, so you can have a potential expansion in that area, and also the residential area is more far away from the existing Richter Mall and the retail shop. So whether we need to separate these ones, if you strengthen Richter Mall, my understanding, majority of people in that area against. If you keep recognized, that's okay.
They'll grow in different ways. So Hornby, there's obviously areas that were car parking that are being developed into as an extension of the mall, and arguably there's a larger area for the centre to grow and strengthen. Riccarton, there's pockets where there's still there's buildings that were demolished after the earthquakes that provide some capacity for it to grow or to replace what was there. And in Riccarton, because the extent of the zoned area is limited, that provides a natural constraint on how much the centre can grow. And obviously the land area and the building envelope is one constraint, as is the infrastructure. So we still want to strengthen the centre and ensure that it maintains that role as a strategic centre, but obviously it's the way in which it's strengthened may not necessarily be in terms of the capacity, but in terms of other improvements, for instance, public transport interchange to support greater access by bus and walking and cycling. So by strengthen, it doesn't necessarily mean intensify or expand. The other, just on that, on Riccarton, the north, within each of our centres, there's different zoning for different areas of a centre. So Riccarton, for instance, the mall on the south side of Riccarton Road has a zoning which enables a much more intensive and larger scale of development, whereas on the north side of Riccarton Road, we zone a commercial fringe zone which provides for a much lower scale of development, and that recognises that there is a relationship, an interface between those commercial buildings on the north side and residential properties that needs to be respected and to avoid effects of those of that development on those residential properties. Now, I'm not saying there's not residential properties adjoining the south side of the mall, but as we've seen, there's already been a significant scale of development occur there, so it's recognising what's there as well. So,
I mean, I know that you've got the key activity centres in the definition section. I actually wonder whether, for the sake of completeness, it would be better to put the definition in the centre's role description, because you've got district, you've got neighbourhood centre, large neighbourhood centre, small, large format centre and local centre. I wonder if the key activity centre should be better placed in there with the specific definition of what it does and the locations, rather than have them at the beginning.
Sure.
I wonder if that would just give us a better line of sight. I have to admit that I can't see how they're defined, you know, by area or yeah.
That's certainly a good point, and we can look at doing that.
Yeah. So, but their zoning can be the same as these district ones.
Key activity centres.
Yeah.
The district
So they can be commercial core, commercial fringe, commercial retail park in Hornby and Belfast.
Key activity centres.
Yeah, they can be. It says the key
That's
activity
right.
centre includes land zone, commercial core, and where applicable, commercial fringe and commercial retail park.
That's right.
So it's the same definition as district.
Except that some of the key activity centres, this is the difficulty between a regional plan and a district plan. We get down to more detail in a district plan. The key activity centres in the regional plan name some of what we are calling neighbourhood centres. They're not all the same level, they're not all the same types of centres.
I know.
That's the problem.
Well, but then do we want to sort of, I mean, we're compounding the problem by separating the definitions and by...
well, it's not so much... We're not trying to compound the problem with respect to definitions. That's not where the issue is, in a sense. It's about recognising the difference of scale and amenities between these types of centres.
Which means that there are two forms of key activity centres in this plan.
Yes, that's right.
But without sort of defining them as key activity centres and then splitting them into district and neighbourhood centre large, which they're all either one or the other, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
Well,
But there's nothing that really sets a key activity centre apart from a neighbourhood centre large, other than the fact that they're named in the regional policy
That's
statement.
correct, yeah,
Well,
yeah. Well, we
I
can't
don't
be
see the point.
inconsistent with the regional policy
Yes, I
statement.
know we can't be
Yeah.
inconsistent,
But
but
potentially we could, we could look at how we could integrate the two so
Yeah,
that people are understanding more. For instance, KAC district or KAC neighbourhood large or something like that.
Yeah. I think you need to deal with them as KACs because otherwise we will be, I think, creating another problem, and they do need some definition around them.
Yeah.
But to set them apart from a neighbourhood centre large that isn't a KAC.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah,
accept that.
yeah. Right. Carry on.
Policy 4, I was just going to move on to. It's a very minor change to add the words enable a wide range of activities rather than just enable a range of activities. It's to acknowledge that as a not just 1 or 2, 3 different activity groups, but it's these centres provide for commercial, community, recreational, entertainment, residential activities. So they're almost a mixed use, locations of mixed use. So in that respect, it's just greater emphasis of that, and also including the words visitor accommodation, because in some cases centres can provide for visitor accommodation, or could do in the future. Apartments, for instance, Quest apartments, as an example of that we see elsewhere in the country of guest accommodation upstairs from retail.
All down Sydenham.
Policy 5 is acknowledging that if in providing for new local centres and the proposed future greenfield residential areas, we want to provide for small-scale local shops to serve that future residential community, but we don't want it to impact on those residents around that new centre. So it's about providing for it, but avoiding impacts on the character and amenity of the residents that surround that new centre. So just to expand on that, in the southwest area plan, for instance, which identifies where the growth occurs in the southwest and identifies all these new greenfield areas for housing. In each of those greenfield areas, it identifies a future node where there's provision for a grocery store or coffee shop, for instance, which can serve residents in that surrounding community, but not of a scale that's going to impact on the centre they go to for weekly groceries, like the Horswell supermarket. So,
yeah, I think the only caution that I've got in there is that we have seen, entire suburbs develop with nothing.
Yeah.
Because the developers have just given up. They've just said, it's too hard to put in a dairy, so we're not going to bother. And that means that everyone jumps in a car to go and get the Sunday paper, and it's just crazy. I just don't think we should ever let that happen again, because all we're doing is encouraging people to be non-sustainable in the way that they live their lives because of the rules that we've put in place. Yeah, so I think we have to be realistic and not allow for residential subdivisions to exist without any amenity at all. Yeah.
This is another good reason why outline development plans were brought into effect for greenfield areas, so that it can be indicated where the commercial area is going to be amongst a number of other factors.
Well, as long as that actually leads to a commercial sector being developed, because we've actually seen examples of where the developer has produced a wonderful plan but then given up on the process of
and in the
putting
second
those in.
tranche of chapters, we'll be bringing to you future urban development areas, which looks at exactly that and strengthening rules for how those ODPs are to be done.
Right.
There's and certainly one of the changes we're proposing, which is different from the current plan, is at the moment these greenfield areas, there's an outline development plan which identifies where a commercial centre is, but the zoning doesn't reflect that necessarily. And on the zoning maps now, you'll see a commercial local centre within those greenfield areas to recognise that it is intended for commercial activity, and if the developer decided, like as occurred at Aidenfield and Northwood, that they don't want to develop a commercial centre, they want to develop it for residential, then they'll either come in for resource consent or a plan change, because it's obviously inconsistent with the rules for the commercial zone. But at the moment, because it would only be inconsistent with an outline development plan and not necessarily the zoning, it gives the plan more teeth going forward.
Yeah, but I honestly think that we cannot argue anything around sustainability if we allow for people to opt out of their responsibility to provide amenity to a local community. And, I don't see that there ought to be a capacity to apply for a change in the zone to prevent or to develop more residential, which might be more lucrative for the developer, but isn't very sustainable for the community.